Morning always came quietly on his ranch, slow, unhurried, wrapped in the soft gold light that stretched over the fields. The young cowboy had grown used to that silence. At 26, he lived alone by choice, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of feeding horses, fixing fences, and listening to the wind push through the prairie grass. Nothing ever truly surprised him anymore. Until today. He was carrying a saddle toward the barn when he noticed a figure standing at the far edge of his property. A woman. Still. Silent. Almost a silhouette against the rising sun. At first he thought she might be a traveler passing through, maybe someone needing water or directions. But something about the way she stood, steady, almost rooted, made his breath catch. As he walked closer, the world around him felt strangely quiet, as if even the air was holding its breath. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, dressed in traditional Apache clothing softened by dust from a long journey. Her dark hair fell in loose, wind-touched strands around her shoulders, and her posture was firm but respectfully humble, a stance that said she wasn't here by accident. Her eyes lifted to his, and in that moment, something flickered inside him. Recognition? He wasn't sure. It felt more like déjà vu, the echo of a memory he couldn't reach. He cleared his throat gently. "Morning, can I help you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him with a strange mixture of hope and hesitation, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. She looked confident, strong in her own right, but there was something quiet beneath it, a trembling at the edge of her breath, a vulnerability she wasn't trying to hide. Finally, in a voice soft but steady, she asked, "Do you remember me, cowboy?" The words hit him like a wave he wasn't ready for. Something about her tone, familiar, tender, almost pleading, pulled at a part of him he didn't know he'd guarded so tightly. His fingers tightened slightly around the saddle, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his heart gave one uneven thump. "I don't think we've met," he murmured, though even as he said it, he felt unsure. Her gaze didn't waver. Instead, she looked almost relieved, as if she'd expected his confusion. "I traveled a long way to find you," she said quietly. "May I speak with you, alone?" The request was simple, but something in her voice carried weight, as though she was asking for much more than a private conversation. Her eyes held stories, an exhaustion, and a strange warmth that stirred him somewhere deep. Against all logic, he felt drawn to her, to the calm way she breathed, to the unspoken familiarity, to the mystery she carried like a shadow. He nodded slowly, stepping aside and gesturing toward the ranch house. As she walked past him, he felt the faint brush of her shoulder against his arm, gentle, unintentional, but enough to send a quiet shiver through him. He didn't know her. But something in him whispered that he should. And as the door closed behind them, he realized that whatever she had come to say, it was going to change everything. Inside the small ranch house, the air felt warmer, quieter, almost too intimate for two people who barely knew each other. The cowboy set the saddle aside and offered her the chair at the kitchen table, an old wooden thing that had seen more lonely breakfasts than shared conversations. She sat gently, her movements soft and deliberate. Her fingers drifted over the table's surface, tracing the carved swirls and scratches left by years of use. It wasn't fidgeting, it felt more like she was grounding herself, preparing to open a door she hadn't touched in a long time. He watched her, curious yet strangely nervous. Something about her presence pulled him inward, like a memory pressing against the edge of awareness but refusing to reveal itself. "Would you like water?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just a moment. Please." Her voice was calm, but he caught the slight tremor, not fear, but anticipation. Whatever she came to say mattered to her deeply. She lifted her eyes to his, and in that quiet connection, the world outside seemed to fade. "You really don't remember, do you?" she asked softly. He gave an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry. I'm trying." She inhaled slowly, gathering strength. "Years ago, there was a storm. A terrible one. A child was lost in it. Something in his chest tightened. A storm. A child. He opened his mouth, but she continued, her voice dipping into a softer, almost reverent tone. You found her. She was injured, frightened, alone. You carried her through the rain, wrapped her in your coat, held her hand so she wouldn't be afraid. A faint ripple passed through him, like someone brushing dust off a buried memory. You brought her to safety, she whispered, and stayed beside her until her family arrived. His brow furrowed as a distant image flickered through him, a tiny hand gripping his, a trembling voice asking if he would stay until morning, a pair of terrified eyes he had comforted through a long and violent night. He felt something shift inside. That was, you, he murmured, barely breathing the words. She nodded once, slow and certain. Yes. That girl was me. For a moment, all he could do was stare. Her eyes, now older, deeper, steadier, held the same shape, the same quiet gentleness he had seen in that storm-lit shelter. The connection hit him like a soft, unexpected blow. You grew up, he said, almost to himself. A subtle smile touched her lips. We both did. Silence settled between them, warm, not awkward, as the truth sunk in. She wasn't a stranger. She wasn't simply someone who wandered onto his ranch. She was a memory returning in the shape of a woman. She lowered her gaze, her voice gentling. I have carried that day with me for many years. I never forgot your face, or your kindness. He felt heat rise in his chest, not embarrassment, but a quiet, stirring emotion he couldn't name. Why come now? He asked softly. She hesitated, her fingers curling slightly on the table. Because it was finally time, she said. Time to tell you why that moment changed everything for me. Her words hung between them, filled with meaning he didn't yet understand. But he would. And the weight of that truth pressed closer with every breath. For a long moment, her words stayed suspended between them, fragile but powerful. It was finally time. The cowboy leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, the wooden chair creaking under his weight as he tried to read the emotions written in her eyes. She looked both brave and uncertain, as though the truth she carried might change the air in the room the moment it escaped her lips. He kept his tone gentle. Time, for what? Her breath hitched, a small, barely audible sound, and her fingers slowly released the edge of the table. She stood up. Not abruptly, but with a quiet grace, the kind of movement that suggested she had thought about this moment 1,000 times before actually living it. She stepped toward him, stopping only a few feet away. Close enough that he could see the light reflecting in her eyes, close enough to notice the faint tremble of her hands. She clasped them together to steady herself. When I was a child, she began softly, I didn't understand why you risked yourself for me. You were so young, yet you carried me through the storm as if you already knew how to protect someone. He swallowed, the memory still faint, but her description warming something in him. He tried to smile, but there was a heaviness building in his chest. You were just a kid, he murmured. Anyone would have helped. She shook her head gently. Not everyone would have stayed. You did. Her words struck him deeper than he expected. And as I grew, she continued, her voice steadier now, that memory didn't fade. It grew, with me. I kept it close, like a compass. He exhaled slowly, unsure where she was leading him but unable, and unwilling, to look away. Then she said it. I came here, to marry you. The world stopped. He didn't drop the cup in his hand this time, because his hand froze completely. His heartbeat stumbled, then quickened, as if trying to catch up to what she'd said. He stared at her, searching her expression for some hint of a joke, a misunderstanding, anything. But she wasn't joking. Her eyes were steady, almost luminous, filled with sincerity so clear it stole the air from the room. You, his voice cracked slightly. You came all this way, for that? She nodded once, slowly. Yes. His breath shuddered out. Why? Her voice softened to almost a whisper. In my tribe, a life debt is a powerful bond. But for me, this is not about a debt. I came because I have carried the truth in my heart for years. You are the man I want beside me. The man I trust. The man I chose. He felt heat rise in his chest, emotion, confusion, something dangerously close to tenderness. He stood slowly, almost without meaning to, closing part of the distance between them. Listen, he said gently, I'm honored. But you don't owe me your life. Or your future. I don't deserve that kind of devotion. She lifted her chin a little, eyes bright but vulnerable. I'm not here out of obligation. I'm here because I want to be. Her certainty shook him. The tension in the room deepened, not heavy, but intimate. A fragile mix of desire, fear, gratitude, and something he didn't dare name yet. He could feel the storm of emotions between them, the kind that quietly changes the direction of a life. The cowboy needed air, not to escape her, but to steady himself from the weight of what she had just revealed. So when she quietly suggested walking the ranch with him, he agreed almost instinctively. Something about being outside, under open sky, felt like the right place to process what was happening between them. The moment they stepped out of the house, the wind met them gently, brushing past like an old friend. The prairie stretched wide and bright, the kind of landscape that made emotions feel both smaller and more honest. She wrapped her arms lightly at her waist, not from cold but from the quiet nervousness of being close to him. He walked beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He didn't know if she noticed, but he did. Every small shift in her footsteps, every glance she cast toward him, every soft smile she tried to hide when he caught her looking. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was warm, like two people rediscovering a connection that had never truly disappeared. So, he said finally, his voice low but gentle, you traveled far. She nodded. Many days. But every mile felt right. He wasn't used to hearing someone talk about him with that kind of certainty. It made something inside him stir, a mixture of humility and unfamiliar hope. As they reached the small creek on the far side of the ranch, she stepped carefully across the stones. One shifted unexpectedly beneath her foot, and she wobbled. He caught her instinctively, one hand at her arm, the other at her back. The contact was brief, steady, and unexpectedly intimate. Her breath hitched just slightly. That stone tricked me, she murmured, half smiling. He kept his hand lightly on her arm until he was sure she was steady. The warmth of her skin lingered on his fingers even after he let go. You okay? He asked softly. Yes. Her smile softened. Because you caught me, again. The word struck him deeper than he expected. They walked on, their steps naturally sinking. She listened to him talk about the ranch, how he rebuilt it after a harsh season, how he worked alone, how the silence sometimes felt heavier than he admitted. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush him. She listened with her whole posture, her eyes focused, her presence patient and gentle. In return, she shared pieces of her life, not just the hard parts, but the beautiful ones. Training with her elders. Her love for the night sky. The stories she carried, the ones passed through her people like treasured heirlooms. She spoke with quiet passion, her hands moving delicately as she explained things that mattered to her. He found himself drawn to her courage, her clarity, her sincerity. She was confident, yes, but her confidence was shaped by vulnerability, by the risks she had taken to come here, by the hope she carried so openly. When the wind lifted her hair slightly, he instinctively reached to brush a loose strand away from her face. His touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but she leaned into it ever so softly, her eyes lifting to meet his. I hoped, she said quietly, that you would still be the man I remembered. He swallowed, the emotion tightening his chest. And am I? She nodded, her voice barely above a breath. Yes. Maybe even kinder. They stood there for a moment, the world fading around them, just the two of them, breathing in the growing closeness. By the time they walked back toward the house, something had shifted between them. Not dramatically, not suddenly. But deeply. Quietly. He wasn't just learning who she had become. He was beginning to learn who he might be, with her. The sun had begun its slow descent by the time they returned to the ranch house. The light softened into warm amber, stretching long shadows across the ground and bathing everything, the fence posts, the barns, even the dust in the air, in a kind of gentle melancholy glow. It was the hour when the world grew quieter, when thoughts felt louder, and when unspoken feelings pressed closest. They settled on the porch steps, a comfortable distance between them, not far, not close, just enough to let their shoulders almost, but not quite, touch. She tucked her legs slightly to the side, her dress brushing against the wooden boards. He rested his arms on his knees, staring ahead at the horizon rather than at her. Not because he didn't want to look at her, but because looking at her made everything inside him tighten with feelings he didn't yet trust himself to name. She sensed the shift. Her eyes softened. "You're quiet," she said, voice warm but laced with uncertainty. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm thinking. A lot." "About me?" she asked, not teasing, but sincerely. He nodded once, honest as ever. "Yeah. About you. About what you said. About marriage." She folded her hands on her lap, fingers nervously brushing over each other. That tiny movement, so small, so vulnerable, tugged at him harder than her boldness had earlier. "I didn't mean to frighten you," she said quietly. "But I wanted to speak truthfully." "You did," he replied gently. "And I'm not frightened. Just, overwhelmed, maybe." A hush settled over them. The air felt thick with the weight of everything unspoken. He finally turned his head to look at her, really look at her. The fading sunlight caught her profile, her steady jaw, her soft lips, the calm strength in her eyes. She wasn't a lost child anymore. She was a woman standing at the edge of her own future, and she was asking to build that future with him. And that terrified him, not because he didn't want her, but because he wanted her more than he expected. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly, his voice steady but emotional. "Are you sure you came here because you choose me, and not because you feel you owe me something from the past?" Her expression flickered, surprise, then hurt, then something deeper. Vulnerability. She looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. "You think I came because I had no choice?" "I'm afraid of that," he admitted. "I don't want you giving up your freedom or your own dreams because of something I did when you were a child." Her eyes lifted to his, shining with emotion. "I'm not here because of a debt. I'm here because of who you became in my memory, and who you still are. This is my choice. My heart's choice." The honesty in her tone shook him. He reached out slowly, carefully, and placed 2 fingers beneath her chin, guiding her gaze upward. Their eyes met, and a warm, fragile tension filled the space between them. Her breath caught, just slightly. "I don't ever want you to feel bound to me," he whispered. "I'm not bound," she replied softly. "I'm drawn." Those words lodged deep in his chest, stirring something powerful. He let his hand fall gently away, but their closeness lingered, thick and undeniable. She wasn't forcing anything. She wasn't demanding. She was simply offering her truth, and waiting, patiently, almost painfully, for him to discover his own. As the last light of day faded, he realized something quietly frightening. The conflict in his heart wasn't about whether he could accept her. It was about whether he deserved her. Night settled softly over the ranch, bringing with it a quiet that felt almost sacred. The stars were beginning to scatter across the sky, and the faint chorus of crickets rose from the fields. The cowboy lit a small fire beside the porch, something he rarely did alone, but tonight felt different. Tonight, silence needed warmth. She joined him without being asked, sitting close enough that the glow of the flames painted her skin in warm gold. She folded her knees toward him, her posture open but gentle, as though she understood how carefully he was balancing his emotions. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire cracked softly, and the night breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and distant sage. He could feel her presence beside him, steady, patient, quietly hopeful. It comforted him more than he wanted to admit. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're still thinking," she said softly. He gave a small, rueful smile. "I don't think I've ever thought this much in one day." Her lips curved into a quiet smile. She didn't push, didn't question him. She simply waited, and that patience, that respect, made something inside him loosen. He stared into the fire for a moment before speaking again. "When you told me why you came, it shook me. Not in a bad way. Just, deep." She turned slightly toward him, her gaze warm. "I'm glad it mattered." "It did," he said. "More than you know." Her breath hitched faintly, hope flickering in her eyes, a delicate, unguarded emotion he felt almost protective of. He took a slow breath. "I was afraid today. Not of you, but of wanting something too fast. Of making the wrong choice for you." Her eyebrows softened, and she shifted just a little closer, a small movement, but full of care. Their knees brushed lightly, the contact was warm, grounding. "You're not making choices alone," she murmured. "I'm here because I already made mine." Something in his chest tightened, an ache mixed with relief. He looked at her then, fully, openly. The firelight reflected in her eyes, turning them soft and bright. He could see the emotion she carried so unashamedly, admiration, hope, affection, and a quiet kind of longing. Slowly, she reached out, not rushing, not assuming. Her hand hovered near his for a second, as if asking permission without words. When he didn't pull away, she gently wove her fingers through his. His breath caught. Her touch was warm, not demanding, not possessive, just, present. A connection offered, not taken. He squeezed her hand lightly. She inhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing in a way that made his heart stutter. They sat like that for a while, fingers intertwined, letting the silence say what their voices couldn't yet. Eventually, he spoke, his voice low and roughened with sincerity. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you arrived." She turned her head toward him, eyes shining with quiet emotion. "Then tell me what your heart wants," she whispered. He swallowed hard, feeling the truth rising in him like a tide he could no longer hold back. "It wants you to stay." Her breath trembled, not from fear, but from relief so strong it softened her whole expression. She leaned slightly toward him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her shoulder against his. "Then I will," she said, voice barely above a breath. The night settled deeper around them, but something bright had sparked between their joined hands. It wasn't a promise yet, not fully. But it was the beginning of one. A truth finally spoken. A choice finally made. Tomorrow would bring clarity. Tonight brought connection. And it was enough. The moon had climbed high over the ranch, pouring silver light across the quiet land. Coyotes sang somewhere far off, but inside that small wooden cabin, everything was still. The cowboy stood near the fire, his hat hanging low in his hand, while she sat at the small table, her posture straight, her braids falling over her shoulders like dark rivers. They were finally alone. She had waited years for this moment, years of silence, years of distance, years of dreaming. And he had lived years believing she had forgotten him entirely. The flames cracked softly as she turned toward him, her dark eyes steady, full of something ancient and unshaken. "Cowboy," she whispered, the word trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Do you know why I came back?" He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly tight. "You said you came to thank me," he murmured. "But I reckon there's more you ain't told me." Her fingertips touched the small leather pouch at her chest, the same one he had given her as a child to carry herbs and beads so she wouldn't be afraid. She opened it slowly, revealing a tiny woven bracelet, something childish, uneven, but precious beyond measure. "You tied this on my wrist after you saved me," she said, her voice breaking. "You told me to hold on to something good, and someday, I would grow strong enough to choose the life I wanted." His heart clenched. He remembered that day. She was barely 10, terrified, injured, whispering in broken English. He had said anything he could to keep her alive. He never imagined she remembered his words. But she remembered everything. She stood, the bracelet held gently in her palms. "When my tribe found me again, I kept this hidden. When we moved camps, I kept it close. When I learned to hunt, to ride, to lead, I kept it with me. Because it reminded me of the man who saved me, the man I decided to return to." Her breath steadied. Her shoulders squared. "And tonight," she said softly, "I give it back." She placed the small bracelet in his hand. His fingers trembled as he looked at it, old, fraying, far too small for her now, yet heavier than anything he had ever carried. "I waited until I was grown. Until I was worthy. Until I could stand beside you as a woman, not a frightened girl." Her gaze lifted, fierce and unwavering. "I came back because I made a vow the night you saved me, a vow I have kept every single day since." The fire popped sharply, as if punctuating her words. The cowboy stared at her, speechless. No one, had ever spoken to him with such certainty, such devotion, such raw truth. The weight of it struck him like a blow to the chest. She stepped closer. "Do you remember me, cowboy?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I'm the Apache girl you saved, and I've come to marry you." The words hung between them, sacred, steady, forever. And nothing in his quiet life would ever be the same again.